What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. Mtg down there, youtube.com, all that you know by now. And I've got some Hour of Devastation spoilers for you this Thursday. You probably know that by now, too. Just spoilers every day. And some of these today are, like, super awesome, and I want to talk about them, and there's, like, 14 different spoilers. So there's no time to waste. Let's get to it. Now, as usual, before I get into the more impactful stuff, I'm going to run through some cards that I think might be good and limited, starting with Hope Tender. Hope Tender is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 human druid, and you can pay 1 and tap it to untap target land. You can also pay 1, tap it, and exert it to untap 2 lands. Well, this is at least decent with stuff like Nykthos and anything else that produces more than 1 mana. And is a land. So there's that, you know. It's also at least kind of decent, sort of, with all of the different, you know, God's Last X cards that we've seen. Like Oketra's Last Mercy is a good example. Bantu's Last Reckoning, stuff like that. Things that leave your lands tapped down on the next turn. Obviously, you can just exert this and untap 2 of your lands, so at least there's that. But all in all, I'm not seeing a whole lot of potential out of this, but I will say that it's a bear, 2 mana 2/2 with 2 upsides. So at least there's that. That doesn't seem awful. Speaking of 2 mana 2/2s with upside, here's Steward of Solidarity right here. It's 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human warrior. You can tap it and exert it to create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. Now, like I just said, 2 mana 2/2s with upside are always at least worth looking at, but I'm not 100% sure about this. You know, mono-white aggro decks and such aren't necessarily going to like tapping a creature every other turn and leaving it tapped down in subsequent turns. Just to create like 1/1 every other turn. I don't know about that. It seems at least good and limited where it can theoretically at least give you like 3 or 4 creatures over the course of a game. You know, wide boards are always decent, and sealed especially. But honestly, I'm not 100% sure about the constructed playability of this card at all, although it does seem decent and limited. Here's Fervent Paincaster. It's 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/1 human wizard. You can tap it to have it deal 1 damage to target player, or you can tap it and exert it to have it deal 1 damage to target creature. Running theme of exert cards good and limited here, and I don't think this one's any different. It taps for damage to a creature, and even though it exerts, that's always at least a somewhat desirable ability in limited, especially with, you know, 1 toughness guys running around, and there are a few of those, including other Paincasters, so, you know, achievement unlocked if you kill a Paincaster with a Paincaster, but, you know, it can also just sit there and deal 1 damage a turn to the other player, so that's not awful and limited either, although I'm not really sure how great the card is, but I guess the last thing I'll say is 3 mana for a 3-power dude is at least alright. Here's River Hoopo right here. Love the name and the art on this card. It's Simic colors, a green and a blue for a 1/3 bird with flying. You can pay 5, 3 a green and a blue, and you can gain 2 life and draw a card. Yeah, 2 mana, 1/3 flying. So that's always good and limited. I'm not sure how much you want to play green-blue, but we haven't seen this set all the way yet, so who knows? But the same token, I'm just not really sure, honestly. I do love that it's a late-game mana sink that gains you life and card advantage. All that's great and limited, but not seeing it make the jump to standard. Here's Vizier of the True right here. It's 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/2 human cleric. You may exert Vizier of the True as it attacks. Whenever you exert a creature, tap target creature an opponent controls. Really like the word "a creature" on this. Whenever you exert anything, tap target creature and opponent controls. And we've seen a bunch of creatures that don't even have to attack to exert, so that's kind of cool. Like, if you have other dudes that just tap to exert, you can tap down their guys on their turn before they can attack with them. That seems at least decent enough of an interaction and limited at least, but again, no jump to standard here, even though in like budget exert decks, it definitely seems like a good top end to get your dudes through when they exert. All that seems good, but I'm not seeing it unless the deck is very budget-oriented, because there's just way more, you know, better choices at 4-drop for really any deck. Here's another thing for the budget exert deck. This is Resolute Survivors right here. It's 3 mana, 1, a red, and a white for a 3/3 human warrior. You may exert Resolute Survivors as it attacks. Whenever you exert a creature, Resolute Survivors deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. This is more like it. As far as like budgety exert creatures, this seems pretty sweet actually, and it drains too. It could just be a loss of life or a damage to the opponent or something, but I do love that it gives you a little life back, make that white mana and the converted mana cost work for something, you know. 3 mana 3/3s are at least okay. That's not bad. And the fact that you can probably get like anywhere between 3 and 6 drains out of this over the course of a game, depending on how many creatures you have, isn't terrible at all. And it works in standard, even with stuff that we already play. You know, Glorybringer and Glorybound Initiate will do a little bit extra damage and gain you some life. when they do exert. You know, it's great with Always Watching, even though it shares a spot on the curve with Watching. It's probably still worth playing, especially if your deck is somewhat budget. So I do like this card, but I'm not sure it's going to see the play to real competitive Standard, but it might be a force at F&M. A new challenger appears. Actually, as I was editing, Channel Fireball just previewed a new card that I really want to talk about before tomorrow. This is Nimble Obstructionist right here. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 3/1 bird wizard with flash and flying and cycling 2 and a blue. It's pretty good already. When you cycle Nimble Obstructionist, counter target activated or triggered ability you don't control. So keeping in mind that I've only seen this card for the first time like 10 seconds ago, literally. First of all, this is the second card we've seen this week that's like makes the case for unbanning Aetherworks Marvel. So at least there's that. But there are a ton of activated abilities that you want to counter in Standard, and you can counter Planeswalker abilities with this, so that's pretty cool. So I like this for sort of a fish deck, you know, something tempo oriented. It's really nice to have a flash flying creature that can counter something, you know, an onboard ability, which is nice because in, you know, control decks, you always want to be able to have cards that just in case things do slip through the cracks, you can do something about them. That's one of the reasons that a card like Disallow was always pretty good. You know, if something does hit the board that has an activated ability, then you can always just like at least counter one activation of it. You know, in case you didn't have the counterspell it the first time. This is much the same. You know, if something does hit the board early that you don't have the ability to counter yet, you can always just at least counter one activation or one trigger. So that's kind of neat. And this can obviously counter ETB effects, which is pretty sweet, actually. So that's pretty cool. And cast triggers as well. So, you know, it can counter an Ulamog trigger too, so that's just really sweet. Like, actually, the more I absorb this card, the better it gets. So, really like this, and the fact that it comes on a flying 3-powered body is just ridiculous. Like, I don't know if this is going to be the best card in Standard or anything, but it'll probably see some play, especially considering it gives a deck like Blue-White Flyers or Blue-White Flash yet another good 3-mana piece. Like, this is no spell queller, but it's definitely the next best thing. So, big fan. Definitely, probably going to see some play. Well, let's get on to the stuff that's a little bit more worth talking about here. This is Jeru the Purified. A lot of people have been waiting on Jeru. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a legendary human warrior. It's a 4/3 with vigilance. When Jeru the Purified enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. If the source would deal damage to a Planeswalker you control, prevent 1 of that damage. Okay, so a surprising amount of people have been writing off this card, but even though it's at 5 mana, anytime a card goes and gets arguably the most impactful permanent type available, you know, just tutors that up for you, it's probably worth looking at. And it doesn't just do that. You know, it also makes it to where if like 3 guys get through to your Planeswalker, they deal 3 less damage in total. That also seems okay. So, like, the card isn't bad. I guess there are some bad things about it. You know, it's boltable for all that's worth. It's graspable. There's bad things about it as far as, like, what removal hits it, although it can't be Fatal Push. That's something. But just the fact that it tutors up a Planeswalker is crazy. It also shares a spot on the curve with most of the Planeswalkers you'd want to go tutor up, but I don't see that being a problem, you know. More or less any Planeswalker you want on turn 6 is probably workable in the right deck. And we already saw, like, Thalia's Lancers make somewhat of a splash in this Standard. There were Black-White Legends decks for a while there that played like a 3 or 4 of Thalia's Lancers, and I compare this to that somewhat favorably because I like the permanent type that it's going to get a little bit more. All in all, though, a 4/3 Vigilance body that tutors up maybe possibly the best card in your deck for you, I can't sneeze at that. I don't think that's bad, necessarily. 5 mana is an awful lot, sure, but I mean, and yeah, there's better stuff on the curve, I guess, in white. Like, you play Avacyn, you know. There's just better stuff at 5-drop in a lot of ways in this Standard. But at the same time, I mean, it is really hard to just, like, say this card is bad. Because, I don't think it's bad. Speaking of 5-drops I don't think are bad, this is the Scarab God right here. It's going to sound like I think it's bad, but I just have to make arguments against everything. And arguments for, so don't worry. But the Scarab God is 5 mana. That's 3, a blue, and a black for a 5/5 legendary god. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life, and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. You can pay 4, that's 2, a blue, and a black, to exile target creature card from a graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie, so you can eternalize more or less anything in any graveyard for 4 mana. When the Scarab God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Well, this is our boy Wedge's spoiler from the Mana Source, and it's a really good card, honestly. I said this on Twitter yesterday, but I like that YouTubers appear to be getting better cards at large this previous season, which I think is a good move for WotC, but of course, my opinion is probably biased, but, you know, I think that it's nice to give YouTubers actually decent cards, so there's that. Just want to make that point. But in his video, he mostly focused on this card's applications in Commander. And I definitely see why you'd do that. Seems potent in Commander. You know, he checked it against other blue-black zombie commanders and such. I think that was an interesting, you know, exercise to do and a great argument to make. But this is more of a standard focused channel, as you guys know. So I have to make the case for and against it in Standard. And I think that in Standard, again, I'm just not 100% on it. Although, I will say, first of all, look at all of the text on this card, and it's all pretty good text. Now, there are currently 2 lines of thought on this card in Standard, one being obviously blue-black zombies, and the other being some sort of blue-black or blue-black X control deck. As far as zombies goes, the idea here is to replace Liliana's Mastery at 5-drop and play this card instead. And honestly, I'm not sure that this is better than Mastery in that deck. Mastery puts out 6 power among 2 dudes. That's not bad at all. And it boosts all your other zombies, so it very often puts out way more than 6 power for 5 mana. Good card, and it's really resilient to removal because no removal can hit it that, you know, that would hit creatures, obviously. There's almost no main deck removal outside of like Cast Out that hits Liliana's Mastery. This, on the other hand, even though the removal can hit it, but not Grasp of Darkness, not Fatal Push, those are important things to not hit it, you know. Even if removal does hit it, a lot of the time it's just going to come back anyway. Plus, scrying right before you draw is incredibly powerful. Don't just forget about that. The card does that, and that's really awesome, you know. And being able to like make them lose a few life every turn in zombies is really nice, because all you got to do is keep the card out and block. You know, that'll probably work out relatively well for you. So I like that, and probably those aren't even the best abilities on the card, you know. Being able to reanimate more or less anything, you know, from any graveyard. I love that it's your opponent's graveyard too, or any opponent's graveyard in Commander, you know. But talking about Standard here, the ability to use your opponent's graveyard is really, really nice here. And sure, you can get a huge guy and it's still just a 4/4, who cares, but it's going to be really important to be able to eternalize anything in either graveyard, so don't count it out. It seems fantastic. Although, I will say this, zombies may not want to eternalize its own creatures, may not want to eternalize its Relentless Deads or its Prized Amalgam since you're playing blue in this deck. It may not want to eternalize its Dread Wanderers and stuff like that, so there's an argument against it there too. But all in all, as far as, you know, top of the curve for zombies, you have to add blue to the deck, which a lot of people don't necessarily want to do, but it does open you up to Prized Amalgam. You know, you drop white, you play blue-black, you get this, you get Prized Amalgam, and there's lots of tricks. Lots of tricks. And the card is just obviously crazy. Like, there's a lot of value on it, so it's hard to judge, and it's really up to whether or not Mastery is just better. Now, as far as control goes, I really don't see the card in blue-black control, mostly because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield. That is a really important thing. For any competitive format, and you're a 5-drop, you gotta do something when you play the card. That's just kind of usually how it is. And even though it does recur, I'm still not sure, man. You play this on turn 5, and you don't have any mana open to answer anything your opponent does, whether it be counter spells, attacking you. You know, you have to be able to remove creatures. There's just, you're out of mana if you play this on curve. And if you wait till turn 8 to keep mana open for counter spells, I'm not sure how great it is then either. But at least in control, you'll be killing your opponent's creatures, so you can get them out of their own graveyard. Problem is, though, you're not going to have any creature density yourself, although I will say eternalizing a Torrential Gearhulk seems pretty dope. On that note, it's worth noting that this can eternalize at instant speed. That's really cool. That should say play only as a sorcery, but it does not, which means that even if Torrential Gearhulk's in your graveyard and this is on the battlefield, Torrential Gearhulk still more or less has flash. So that's pretty great to note. Last thing I'll say here, and I'm done on the Scarab God, is that I like the way that all 3 of the gods react to each other. So let me bring them all up here. Here's the Holy Trinity. Okay, note the cool synergies going on between all three of these cards, and it's probably Christmas land to assume you'll have all three of these out at any given time, but assuming that you actually do, they synergize really, really well. Scorpion God can put things into your opponent's graveyard for the Scarab God, and when he does kill things, the Scorpion God that is, then you'll draw cards. Well, when you draw cards, that activates the Locust God, and that'll give you, 1/1 haste flyers. So that's really cool. And by the way, the Scarab God lets you scry things so that when you do draw cards with the Locust God, you'll get good draws, presumably. So the way these all synergize with each other is really, really neat. Don't have much time though, so I'm on to the next card. Here's Uncage the Menagerie. It's 2 green and X for a sorcery. Search your library for up to X creature cards with different names that each have converted mana cost X. Reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So a couple of things that people have apparently not been catching when they read the card. All the cards have to have different names. You can't search up any of the same creature. And it doesn't say X or less. So if you pay 5 mana for this, X equals 3, you go get 3 creatures. And they all have to have different names. They all have to have converted mana cost 3. So a lot of weird stuff to remember about this card when casting it, but all in all, I think this is a pretty powerful card. For just 3 mana, it can search up any 1-drop in the history of Magic. For tutors for 1-drops is not a bad idea when you got some pretty sweet 1-drops. Even in Standard, this can go get like a Dragon Master Outcast or something if you wanted to, so that's good. And for 4 mana, searching up 2 2-drops is nice, but it starts, it starts really showing its sorcery speed quickly, is all I'm saying. Because even though pumping 5 mana into this gets you 3 3-drops, which is somewhat desirable when you're going to get like Whirler Virtuoso, Tireless Tracker, and a Rogue Refiner. That seems pretty decent in the Temur Energy decks, but 5 mana at sorcery speed, I'm not 100% sure about. But at least in Commander, the card looks like it will definitely shine. That format wants tutors all day. But even in Standard, I don't think it's terrible, depending on what 1-drops they print, to want to tutor up a 1-drop for 3 mana. It's not bad. Here's another green card right here. This is Ronus' Last Stand. It's 2 green mana for a sorcery. Create a 5/4 green snake creature token. Land you control, don't untap during your next untap step. Now, if I had to pick a card that has generated the most arguments today, it's probably this, possibly tied with the Scarab God, but this has generated a lot of discussion and some debate among even the spikiest of spikes this morning. So, how do I feel about it? Still not sure, to be honest with you. Okay, so arguments 4 to start off with here. It's only 2 green for a 5-power dummy. Pretty good. Just a big dumb creature that's 5 power on your second turn is pretty good. That's like the biggest creature you can play on turn 2 in almost any format. So that seems good right there. At the same time, though, I don't like leaving your lands tapped on one of your most critical turns in the kind of deck that might want this. You know what I mean? Turn 3 is a very important turn. But, same token, in these mono-green stompy decks that might want to run this, you can still have 1 mana open on turn 3 pretty easily. Just drop a forest and then Kessig Prowler or whatever you do, So not too hard to get a 1-drop. People are saying turn 1 Attune with Ether, turn 2 this, turn 3 Greenbelt is probably a decent turn sequence. So I like the idea of this in Mono Green Stompy, and I also like that in Mono Green Stompy, you don't have to play it turn 2. Obviously, you can play it turn 3 or 4, and then the next turn you'll have 2 or 3 mana open, and that's plenty of mana direct face in those decks. So you can also, on your next turn, if you play this turn 2, for instance, or you can go ahead and leave up Blossoming Defense on your next turn. Play a forest, leave up Blossoming Defense for their Fatal Push, which is probably one of the best arguments against the card. The fact that Fatal Push is so well represented, I guess we'll say right now, really hurts the idea that this card will see any play. But at the same time, you can always just play it on turn 3 and leave up Blossoming Defense. You could do that. I'm just not sure, you guys. Like, Mono Green Stompy is looking at least decent, and we'll see another card today that makes a good argument for Mono Green Stompy. So I think that it could be a thing. I just really have to play with this card. I want to see the card in action before we really make a judgment on it. I would say this is not one to rush to a verdict on. I mean, when the card goes wrong, it goes really wrong, It's like if you're on the draw, the card seems particularly bad, especially if they can deal with it on their turn 3. Well, then your turn 3 rolls around, you're more or less tapped out, you might get a 1-drop, but they'll go on their turn 4 and play something crazy, or just be very, very prepared for your turn 4. So I'm not 100% sure because if the card goes wrong, it really goes south quickly from there. But when the card goes right, it's painful. It is very painful for your opponents. And I should say this, in Limited, the card looks like a crazy bomb. If you do get this turn 2 in Limited, then obviously removal is at a premium in Limited and not as much removal is played, and removal is not as reliable. So if you get this on turn 2 in Limited, it can just outright win the game for you. By the way, I should have said this forever ago, but if you hear people like screaming in the background every now and again, my wife's playing Dead by Daylight, so don't mind her. You need like audio cues in that game. And it's a really awesome game. It just came out on PS4 like a couple of days ago. We've been playing the crap out of it. But anyway, move on to the next card here. I just wanted to say that in case I got a bunch of comments like, are they running a slaughterhouse? What's going on in Dev's house? Yeah, that'll throw him off the trail. Here's Earthshaker Kenra right here. It's 2 mana, 1 in red for a 2/1 Jackal Warrior with haste. When Earthshaker Kenra enters the battlefield, target creature with power less than or equal to its can't block this turn. And you can internalize it for 6 mana, 4 and 2 red. Boy, have I seen a bunch of people not realizing this card is good so far in comment sections. I really like this. First of all, a 2 mana, 2 power guy with haste in red is at least okay. This is obviously at least somewhat pushed for mono red aggro. And yeah, you probably won't get to 6 in a dedicated mono red aggro deck, but just in case you do, this is a really good play when you get to 6 mana. You know, you get probably the biggest guy you'll play in your entire deck, and you keep another guy from blocking. And with the critical mass of cards in red right now that keep creatures from blocking, we got this, Cartouche of Zeal, On-Crop Crasher. There's just so many good cards right now in red that keep creatures from blocking for like up until turn 4 or even 6 in this case. So I don't think the card is bad. It's a premium 2-drop for red decks, and I don't mean that lightly, especially even if you're on the draw, the card is at least decent, which is not true of most mono red aggro cards. And if they do kill it, which they very likely will, it can always come back later, which is a nightmare for control decks that won't be able to counter Eternalize, by the way. There's no counter spell. There's no counter spells in baseball. You can't do that against Eternalize. So it'll give control decks headaches too. Just all in all, I really like this card, is all I'm going to say. You know, especially on your turn 2. If they played a 1-drop, the card is fine. But it doesn't have to be a 2-drop, fellas. Like, you play this on turn 3 or 4 alongside something else, especially another haste creature or maybe a pump spell or something like that. And it's fantastic in that situation too. You know, when you're using it alongside other cards, fantastic, you know, like kill a guy, bolt a dude, or whatever you want to do, you know, and then throw this down and keep the other guy from blocking. Swing in with not only this, but anything else you got on the battlefield. Just card looks really, really solid in mono red aggro. I would not count this out, and again, I am really surprised at the amount of people that are. The card looks more than solid, actually. Here's a big old demon legend, man. This is Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded right here. He's 8 mana, 5 and 3 black. That's a lot. For an 8/8 legendary demon with flying and trample, he's got flample. Pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. What they should have done is just made this guy look like the guy on Demonic Tutor. You know, like this is the tutor. Like that would have been a neat little callback. But either way, I still like to picture that every time like you Diabolic or you Demonic Tutor or something like that, then you're getting... this is the guy that's granting you that wish. I really, really like this card in Commander, but you gotta get to it, which may be a problem, you know. But just the ability to tutor anything seems really ridiculous. He also seems really good alongside like Liliana Death's Majesty in Standard. This is an 8 mana reanimation target right here. You can dump it into your graveyard early, and then as early as turn 4 or 5. If you can ramp out your Liliana, then you can get it on turn 4. Put this guy right into play, and then from then on, tutor up whatever you want, and Liliana can just get back the creatures that you sacrifice. Like, seems at least a decent idea. Also note that this ability, too, is instant speed. Usually stuff like this is play this ability only as a sorcery, but you can do this EOT if you want to, or you can do it in response to stuff, which is really important. You know, like if they have removal that's on the stack for them, then all you got to do is sacrifice another one of your guys. If they're trying to like unlicense Disintegration, this dude, sacrifice a guy that you don't care about and go get a counterspell or a Blossoming Defense or whatever. You know, if there's some kind of answer that you have for removal in this deck or counterspells, whatever, then you can search it up with this guy by sacrificing something that you don't care about as much. So just the ability to do this at instant speed is unbelievable. Like, even the ability to do this at end of turn is ridiculous. That's super crazy, you guys. And, by the way, I mentioned this before, but I just want to really hammer it home. This is an 8/8 flying trample. Get on a couple of swings with this and you're in business. But, end of the day, it's still an 8 mana creature, and I'm just really not sure that we want to play those in Standard if they're not like we play Ulamog, that's a 10 mana guy, but we try to cheat him into play. You know what I mean? So I'm just not really sure that an 8 mana dude is where we want to be in Standard. This is probably just an exciting commander. But when you add the idea of reanimating it into the mix, now we're talking. We might actually be able to pull that off. Here's Rebuilding Kenra right here. It's the next to last card of the day. I saved my favorite for last. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 Jackal Wizard. When this creature enters the battlefield, you may give target creature +X/+X until end of turn, where X is rebuilding Kenra's power. You can eternalize Kenra for 4 and 2 green. So basically, turn 2 Kessig Prowler can swing for 4. That doesn't seem terrible, and you get a body out of it, too. This is basically a pump spell on a body, which I will not discount. This is the other thing that makes Mono Green Stomping might be actually looking good, sort of, you know? Like, I'm really into this card. I actually like this a little bit more than Ronus's Last Stand, honestly. And a lot of people are a little bit bored by this, or they're like discounting how good it is, or they're forgetting that it eternalizes for a larger than life, basically. You know, +4/+4 is nothing to sneeze at when it eternalizes, and you get a 4/4 too. You get a body and a pump spell a second time that, again, can't be countered. So, like, all of that seems decent, and even on turn 2, pumping your 1-drop, not bad at all. And in a deck with Ronus, doesn't seem terrible either. You know, play Ronus turn 3, play turn 4, you can, like, make your 1-drop big enough to let Ronus swing. Or you can even play a 1-drop and make something else bigger. You know, you'll still have mana to do all kinds of stuff. You know, you can play this on turn 4 and another creature. If that creature has haste, you can make it bigger and go ahead and swing in too. So, a lot of applications for this thing right now. And this also works really well with Anthem effects and stuff, you know? So there's that too. It's just like really crazy card we got right here that I think will actually see some Standard play. I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's out of this world good or anything, but I do think this is a very, very good role player that serves awesome functions, not only on turn 2, but again, as a pump spell on a body, turns 3, 4, 5, or whenever else you play it. Not the worst top deck in the world either. Really not. Especially considering you can just swing with it super liberally in the late game and basically, like, dare your opponent to put it into your graveyard. You know, your opponent will put this into your graveyard, and then it'll be an even bigger headache. You'll get it back next turn. It'll be twice as big, and it'll give a huge boost to one of your guys. And one more thing, this guy will pump mana dorks the first time you play him to where they can actually swing in the early game. So lots of good things to like about this card, you guys. Don't count it out. Card seems at least decent to me. But this is my favorite card of the day right here. It's Claim to Fame. Claim is just 1 black mana. It's a sorcery. You'll cast it out of your hand. Return target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And Fame, you'll cast out of your graveyard. It's 2 mana, 1 and a red for a sorcery. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. You hear me giggling a little bit as I read this card because it's so good. Like, there's been some voices on the internet over the last few hours saying, like, oh, this card's bad. It's the most overrated card so far. But no, I think the hype might actually be real, especially in Modern, because it does look like it slots into Death Shadow pretty well. And there are people saying Kulagan's Command is just straight up better in the current version of the deck, which is something to test for. You guys might be right, but being able to get Death Shadow with this, being able to get Snapcaster Mage with this, seems pretty sweet. And in the Jund Death Shadow deck, you can get Tarmogoyf with this, put it straight onto the battlefield for 1 black, and for just a couple of more mana, Snapcaster can swing for 4, that's okay, and Tarmogoyf can sometimes swing for like 6 with haste. So all of that is pretty decent if I'm counting the mana right here. Even just like the entire card, both halves, only costs 3 mana. That's not terrible. Now in Standard, we don't have quite as many options for this, but there are plenty of aggro decks that might want a card like this, or even pseudo-reanimator decks that might want a card like this. And especially in reanimator decks, note that it can get one of your smaller guys back, put it straight on the battlefield, and then later, when you reanimate a guy, it can give that guy a boost and haste straight out of the graveyard if you got the mana to do it, which is pretty good too. It's not quite Unearth in formats like Legacy, and I don't think it's going to make a splash there because Unearth is just So great, and that's probably why I like this card so much, is I'm a huge fan of Unearth since the card was printed. And even though this is not quite as wide as Unearth, you know, you lose a whole 1 CMC in what you can get, which is pretty enormous. You know, that cuts out a lot of options, especially in the current standard. If this were 3 CMC, that'd be fantastic. But even for just 2, that's excellent, considering it only cost 1 mana. A 1 mana investment is fantastic and is honestly worth not even having to play the Fame half of it. You know, in a deck that just is like black and not red at all, I kind of wouldn't mind playing this, given that the deck has the support at 2-drop, you know what I mean? So just, I really claim is one of the best cards I've seen in a while. Like, 1 mana black uncommons are just out of control in this standard. But that is all of the cards from today, so far at least, you know. If they put a couple of cards out sneakily later on tonight, I might hop back on and tell you about them. But that's 14 cards and a lot of words spoken. So now it's you guys' turn. Let me know how you feel about all of these in the comments section. Did I like or hate a card too much? You can also sub if you're new to all the YouTube stuff. Make sure you get all the upcoming videos, spoilers, deck techs, all that. Follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or you can check us out on Patreon if you want to at patreon.com/SBMTG. And on that note, by the way, patrons, if I haven't done or you haven't heard from me about your deck doctor yet, I have taken the next 2 days off of work, and I'm going to try and focus on deck doctors and get as many of those out as I possibly can. So don't worry, haven't forgot about you. There's just been a lot with spoiler season and all that. So in the next couple of days, I'm going to devote a lot of time to the deck doctor stuff, and I'm going to try to get those out to you if you haven't gotten them yet. So don't worry. But anyway, that's all I've got to say for now. As always, let me know what your favorite cards and all that were. I'm really interested to see your comments on a lot of these today. So, but just do that and all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you cats later. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.